The Power of CEO, a comparative analysis of effective and ineffective organizational leadership by Courtney Marshall. In the words of Rosalind Torres, great leaders are not head down, they see around the corners, shaping the future and not just reacting to it. Leadership is an essential component to either the success or failure of an organization. As we live in the 21st century, we can no longer depend on traditional methods of leadership as the modern workforce is designed to support teamwork and collaboration. Though many leaders have adopted practices that align with the collaborative company culture, other leaders are still stuck in that traditional mindset of leadership where employees should simply act because they are told to do so. Leaders, both good and bad, have some level of power and influence which determines the action or inaction of subordinates. Though many people intertwine the two, power and influence are very different. According to Andrew Dubrin, influence is the ability to affect the behavior of others, while power has the potential or capacity to influence. A leader must first have power in order to influence others. I will be introducing you to two leaders. One of the leaders is Indra Nooyi, former CEO of PepsiCo, and through her positive and influential leadership, she led her team to over a decade of success. I will be comparing Indra to John Stumpf, former CEO of Wells Fargo, who, unlike Nooyi, used negative and unethical influence tactics to drive organizational productivity. This comparison will analyze their leadership characteristics, use of power, and the use of influence in relation to organizational effectiveness. In order to do this, I will first start by providing a background and organizational framework for each leader and an explanation of the culture that the organization was in during that time of leadership. Second, I will explain what form of power each possesses and how that power was used to influence others. Next, I will analyze leadership theory that best describes each leader and how their style of leadership influences the behavioral changes of others and what, if any, influence others have on their decision making. I will then explain the various techniques used by each leader to influence employee motivation. I will conduct an analysis on the self-destructive tendency of each leader and how these tendencies affect leadership effectiveness. And I will conclude with an overall evaluation of how successful these leaders were and make suggestions that will improve organizational effectiveness given the organizational culture. Nooyi and Stumpf, the rise to CEO. According to Sherman Haller, an editor for the Encyclopedia Britannica, Indra Nooyi was an Indian-born woman who was instrumental in the diversification and restructuring of PepsiCo Inc. brand. She served as CEO of PepsiCo from 2006 to 2018. After earning her Master's of Business Administration, Nooyi moved to the U.S. and received an additional master's degree from the Yale School of Management. Nooyi worked as a consultant from Boston Consulting Group and was an executive for Motorola Inc. and ABB. In 1994, Nooyi joined PepsiCo as a senior VP of corporate strategy and development. By 2001, she was the president of and CFO of PepsiCo. Nooyi was responsible for leading restructuring projects of PepsiCo's smaller brands, including Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and KFC. She also oversaw the 1998 acquisition of Tropicana and the 2001 merger with Quaker Oats as part of the organization's strategy to diversify and offer healthier food and drink options. In October 2006, Nooyi became the CEO of Pepsi and became the chairman of the board in 2017. Under her leadership, revenues increased from $35 billion in 2006 to $63.5 billion in 2017. Indra Nooyi was quoted saying, "Leadership is hard to define, and good leadership even harder. But if you can get people to follow you to the ends of the earth, you are a great leader." Further research suggests that Indra sought to build a company culture where people felt like they were making a difference in the world. She sought to maintain a culture and an environment where people could bring their entire selves to work. Employees were encouraged to share ideas, communicate, and work as a team. In contrast, according to Egan et al., John Stumpf was widely known as an everyday guy from middle America who grew up on a family farm with his 10 siblings. In 2015, he was named Morningstar's CEO of the Year and was applauded for condemning activities that put profits ahead of clients like other banks were known for. Stumpf worked as a possession agent at First Bank in Minnesota and became the senior vice president and chief of credit. In June 2006, he became the director of the National Association, and in 2007, he was appointed CEO of Wells Fargo and became chairman in 2010. In 2016, he was involved in a fake account scandal where 2 million checking and credit card accounts were opened without client consent. He agreed to a lifetime ban from the banking industry and had to pay $17.5 million in fines for his role in the fake account scandal. In total, With criminal and civil lawsuits, the scandal has costed Wells Fargo about $2.7 billion and counting. Wells Fargo has always had a culture and reputation of great management, leadership, and ethical practices. Under Stump's leadership, the company culture and environment was strenuous. According to research, there was an intense pressure to meet unrealistic sales goals. Employees were always under a threat of job loss and were coerced to sell at least 8 products a day unethically. John Stump always said, 8 rhymes with great. This was a very hostile, high pressured, and fear based cultural environment. Gaining and utilizing power to influence employee behaviors. According to French and Raven, there are 5 bases of power: legitimate, reward, expert, referent, and coercive. As Indra Nooyi was all about motivation, teamwork, authenticity, and a positive company culture, she used her expert power and referent power to gain power and influence others. As she became more and more successful in smaller roles with PepsiCo, she began to build that level of knowledge and skill that set her apart from other leaders. Research suggests that employees and other managers responded to her positive approach, and corporate leaders responded to her results. Nooyi had referent power as she cared for and gained the respect of others. Her approach was attractive to others as it was something they could relate to and understand the benefits of. Nooyi's power was directly related to her influence to change the behaviors of other leaders, coworkers, and subordinates. According to my research, Nooyi was aware of the age gap between employees. Some were of an older generation, some were millennials. She always strove to meet the employees and subordinates where they were at and ensure that they had a comfortable work environment. Because they knew she cared for them and the overall culture, her referent power gave her influence over them. They trusted her. In contrast, John Stump maintained a culture of fear that was completely results driven at any cost. Subordinates spanning from regional executives to regular employees essentially had their jobs hanging on a thread as they were forced to do whatever it took to maintain their employment. John Stump gained power through legitimate power and coercive power. His legitimate power gave him the formal right to make demands and expect others to be compliant and obedient. His coercive power allowed him to punish others for incompliance. Employees were punished for not meeting unrealistic sales quotas and performance targets. Research reveals that performance targets were not only rooted in customer trends, the market, or any real data. The goals were simply unrealistic and designed to be unattainable through any ethical means. Stump kept his power and influence by maintaining a culture of fear and retaliation. He also gave those powers to the executives directly below him to punish others who did not perform or comply with the corporate expectations. This power directly reflects to how he used influence to change the behaviors of other leaders and subordinates, forcing them to act unethically. Leadership theory and its relationship to subordinate influence. Parsha and Rahman argue that transformational leaders have the ability to transform organizations through their vision for the future, and by clarifying that vision, they can empower employees to take responsibility for achieving that vision. Indra Nooyi was a transformational leader. In agreement with Tracy Duberman's argument, she focused on a relationship between the leaders and the team members, motivated team members, and they all had a shared vision. Through her authentic leadership style, she was able to successfully manage smaller PepsiCo brands and mergers, leading her to eventually become the CEO. In analyzing the transformational leadership theory, I believe that this best describes Nooyi's style of leadership because she was authentic, motivational, and kept the team members on the same page. Through her transformational leadership, Nooyi almost doubled PepsiCo's profit in a matter of 12 years while maintaining a positive and employee-centric culture. In contrast, John Stump followed more along the lines of a leader-member exchange theory. According to Bennington University, the leader-member exchange theory explains that in an organization there are in-group members and out-group members. The in-group members work well with the leader, align with the leader's goals, while the out-group members are less compatible with the leader and have clashing opinions. It's usually the in-group leaders that are more likely to earn promotions and have positions of power. Stump was focused on his in-group leaders, such as Carrie Tolsett, the head of community banking, who Bess Levin argues distorted the sales model and performance management system, promoting low-quality sales and unethical behaviors. Research shows that many of her subordinates described her management style as obsessed with control, as she was faulted for maintaining an inner circle of those who just supported her views, and who protected her. She rejected the near unanimous view of the unreasonable sales goals. Overman argues that even when the outgroup leaders disagreed with the unattainable sales goals, senior leadership pushed back. It was important for the organization to establish clear, measurable, but achievable goals. Wells Fargo did not do this under Stump's leadership. Though Stump denies any allegations of unethical sales practices, he worked closely with Tolsett and he was arguably biased toward her perspectives. Brian Tane argues that Stump was aware of Tulsa's shortcomings but favored her strengths in sales productivity, so he was accepting of her leadership flaws. When analyzing how subordinates related to Stump, Mackey et al. Argue that under the leader-member exchange type of leadership, the supervisor's relationships with subordinates provides a pivotal social context that affects the way that they make sense and react to the abuse of supervisors. Because of this pressure, a report by the Financial Times revealed that district managers held 4 conference calls daily where they hounded subordinates about their sales that the team had generated. A former employee, Brady Grimes, said it borderline harassment. The only subordinates who related to the leader are the in-group members who were close executive team members who supported Stump's vision. They were the only group who had influence over Stump. Research shows that lower-level subordinates, regional managers, had no relation to the leader. Oftentimes, they did not agree, but they were still subject to a hostile and fear-based work environment. The outmembers truly had no voice or power. Everyone was simply expected to perform by any means. Wixon argues that for over a decade, team members were reporting suspicious sales activities and whistleblowers were terminated after using official channels from the company to report it. Over 5,000 employees were fired in connection with the high-pressure sales program, which was still being implemented at the time that Stump appeared before Congress. Influence employee motivation. Team motivation is another important element of the ongoing success of an organization. According to Jean Tang, Indra Nooyi influenced employees' motivation by acknowledging employees and their families in creative and personal ways. In addition to this, she gave employees a clear purpose that empowered her people to share in that purpose. She ensured that people and purpose aligned with the values, and she used that value set to retain employees. She gave employees autonomy. They had influence in the company. She inspired them to act like mini entrepreneurs, which ignited creativity. She also motivated employees by ensuring that they had health and work-life balances, giving them benefits, and also taking the time to express gratitude. These motivational techniques contribute to her ability to influence other managers, subordinates, and employees. Kakmar et al. Argues that leaders who use exemplification engage in behavior that shows moral responsibility, discipline, and personal integrity. The authors go on to emphasize how followers do not want to follow a leader simply because they are working alongside them, but they want to follow and mimic someone who they perceive as credible. The result of this study also shows that ethical behavior produces favorable organizational outcomes. Indra Nooyi, according to this research, also acted ethically to her team, motivating them to give their best efforts in the workplace. In comparison, John Stump motivated his team through fear. Susan Oakes argues that former employees alleged a soul-crushing culture and fear of daily intimidation by managers, where they were encouraged to break the law. She goes on to suggest that multiple employees who were labeled as whistleblowers were fired after reporting violations to the bank's ethics hotline or reporting illegal behaviors of supervisors. Research suggests that employee terminations were not used as a motivation technique to keep the remaining employees silent. Employees were discouraged from carrying challenging leadership and acting ethically. The biggest motivator they had was to simply keep their jobs. Stump also promoted a follow-the-money type of leadership where employees were motivated through monetary incentives for the creation of fraudulent and unnecessary client accounts. Loftus argues that the company created an opportunity for employees to benefit at the expense of customers. Analyzing the self-destructive tendencies of Nooyi and Stump. Though Indra Nooyi is an exceptional leader, in my research, I found oftentimes that she pushes her people until they come up with a solution to the problem. All decisions are ultimately within the power of the leader. Business demands don't always afford the leader time to wait for subordinates to develop a solution. Sometimes it's more effective for a leader to take a quick decision than to wait for another person's collaborative efforts. The desire of Nooyi to have a fully collaborative and open workspace can potentially hinder the attainment of an organizational goal or objective. It's important for leaders to have that balance when making decisions, and that balance should at times include employee or subordinate influence, but at other times it should just be made by the leader. Lurs argues that the Vroom-Yet-Njagoo decision-making model is a tool utilized to help managers choose the appropriate degree of subordinate participation in the decision-making process. I believe that this collaborative style of Nooyi is not necessarily dark, but it can have negative business implications if certain decisions are not made promptly. Alvinius and Baragbo suggest that self-destructive should be considered a harmful behavior intertwined in the process of leading, distinguishing between encouraging subordinates to follow destructive goals and using destructive methods to influence subordinates. John Stump embodies this definition in his way of leadership and influence. John Stump influenced tactics such as deliberate Machiavellianism, which is where Dubrin argues that leaders ruthlessly manipulate others and regularly practice bluffing, deception, and other manipulative practices. Research goes on to suggest that Stumps utilizes power and fear to intimidate employees and to coerce them into participating in unethical practices to meet organizational goals. Not only do these behaviors put the client at risk, but they put employees at risk and the entire enterprise at risk. It's important to recognize the tendencies of a self-destructive leader because the ramifications of that leadership can have ongoing negative reputational consequences. Because of his oversight and leadership, Wells Fargo will never have the exact same reputation again. Even though the CEO is gone and a few others resign, so many others are still with the company that blindly allowed those behaviors to happen. How can they ever fully regain consumer confidence? Stump is a self-serving leader. Ping argues that a self-serving leader puts their own interests above the interests of the organization. Evaluation and suggestions. Indra Nooyi is an exemplary leader. Her success can be credited to her transformational leadership and the importance that she places on team and company culture. As research suggests, Nooyi's goal was to make employees want to work for her, and they did. She appealed to them on the human aspect. Her people got gratitude from her, and she gave it every chance she could. Nooyi can improve her effectiveness within this culture by extending that same sentiment of recognition that she has toward her direct reports to regular employees as well. Though she wouldn't have the time to do that consistently, every now and then she should directly express her gratitude to employees during her local visits. She should also hold the local managers accountable to maintaining a culture of recognition on a daily basis. In contrast, John Stump's success is rooted in abusive power and unethical influence. Research suggests that both him and his closest executives supported that negative company culture by continuously threatening subordinates who did not perform or reach these expectations. Whistleblowers were made an example of, further perpetuating the fear of job loss for speaking up. Not only did this leadership deficiency cost him nearly $18 million in legal fines, but the company as a whole has been charged over $2.9 billion in legal fees and penalties. I believe that the most impactful thing that John Stump can do to improve his effectiveness as a leader is to put efforts toward actually changing the culture of the organization. He should redefine and clarify the expectations and ensure that everyone on the team understands them and follows them. Stump should begin employee engagement surveys to understand the needs of employees and determine what it would take to gain their trust back. A formal recognition program would also help with that cultural shift. Employees may be upset about what has happened in the past, but as time goes on, they can forgive, especially under the promotion and support of a new organizational culture that supports them and their future with the firm. Conclusion. In conclusion, leadership is an essential component to either the success or failure of an organization. Through a collaborative analysis of Indra Nooyi and John Stump, I have shown how their leadership characteristics, use of power, and use of influence relates to their level of organizational effectiveness. I analyzed the leadership theories of transformational leadership and leader-member exchange theory to reveal the framework by which each leader influenced or was influenced by subordinates. I discussed techniques each leader used to influence employee motivation while also considering self-destructive tendencies that may have impacted leadership effectiveness. And I concluded by evaluating the overall success of the leader within the context of their respective organizational cultures and made suggestions that would enhance and improve their organizational effectiveness as leaders.